This is a classic Greek dish that's made with lamb and orzo or other types of pasta, although beef is now also common, mostly due to the lower cost. I'm showing it here with lamb, and I'm telling you right now this is not exactly traditional. I've made some modifications to achieve a more intense, potent flavor in keeping with modern cuisine. Also, unfortunately, I couldn't obtain orzo, so a different pasta has been used, but the principle is exactly the same.
The most cost-effective way of doing this is to use a large piece of lamb you get yourself, and then you do the butchery. You cut off around the bone and you trim the excess fat off. This doesn't really take very long. It'll save you a lot of money. When you buy lamb stew that's already cut up for you, you can't control the size of the pieces, and they charge you a lot extra for that butcher's few minutes of work. So I've got about 450 grams of lamb cut into different sized cubes, but don't make them too big, don't make them too small. These are going to shrimp some, though, during the cooking process, of course. And one of the other advantages of doing it this way is that you end up with some pieces of lamb fat, which we're going to use in just a minute. This is not traditional to the Greek way of making this dish. I'm borrowing a technique from, I think, Azerbaijan or Uzbekistan cuisine, but this is going to work really well. And the point here is to make it as delicious as you can, not to follow traditional method no matter what. And so I'm going to add the teaspoon of coarse salt to this, mix it around a little bit, and then I'm going to heat a pan and begin breaking down this fat. So the pieces go into a pot here. I'm using stainless steel. You could use cast iron if you have it. Don't use Teflon or nonstick. It's going to splatter like crazy. And this is going to be heated on a medium heat, and it's going to take a while for this fat to break down. Now, after 10 or 11 minutes of this with the lid on it and at a low heat, we've got some fat developed there, but I'm going to crank up the heat now from 4 it was on. In order to render this slowly, I'm going to go all the way up to 8 and let it get a little bit hotter first. Okay, it's really hot now, so I'm going to get these pieces of fat out of here, and I'm going to put all the lamb in at one time. This normally would be considered overcrowding the pan, but in this case we're looking to have even flavor, and if I put half of it in, then half of it will be flavored differently than the other half. So you just have to kind of work quickly, and you notice it's still a single layer. I don't have so much lamb in there that it's stacked up on top of itself. That's what you really want to avoid. Going to cook it like this and get that charred lamb fat. I'm going to get that on the outside of this just for like a minute and a half. Okay, here's the meat. I transferred to a bowl. The pan is still smoking hot. I'm adding the passata. This 100 grams of pureed tomatoes. I'm going to get in here to use to pick up the fond. Make sure you get all of it in there. And then the red wine goes in. It's 75 milliliters of red wine. And the heat on the pan is off now. I'm just using the residual heat to deglaze the pan and pick all this up. So leave this sit for a few minutes and go on. The lamb, it was cooked briefly in the lamb fat. You notice it's not really super dark and charred, because this isn't that sort of recipe. You don't want that in the traditional Greek version of this recipe. The meat is not even browned. It just goes straight into the oven raw with the other seasonings to braise. But we're adding an extra step here to provide some more flavor. So now this meat is recombined with the passata and the wine that was used to pick up the fond in the pan, and now we'll add the seasonings. Now we combine the seasonings. We've got 3/4 of a teaspoon of cumin seeds, half a teaspoon of black peppercorns, 1.5 teaspoons of oregano. There's one. Yeah. We're going to grind these first. Okay, from the spice mill. And now we're going to add 1.5 teaspoons of this beaumont seasoning mix. There was a video explaining how to make this earlier, the link there at the beginning. Now this is going to get mixed together, of course. Sit here for a minute, and I'll chop up the red onion here next. And now the 90 grams of red onion. We'll stir this together, and then we'll transfer this to the braising dish in just a second here. As I've explained here before, don't use a braising vessel that's vastly larger than the material you're going to cook. This is about this is about the limit. It's only covering about half of the braising vessel in volume. Really, I should have a slightly smaller one for this. I don't, but this will be okay. Don't go any bigger than this. It needs to come up at least halfway into the braising vessel. Okay, now I'm going to put 1 stick of cinnamon on top of it. Put the cover on, and it's ready to go in the oven. After about 2.5 hours, take it out, give it a little stir around, scrape the edges a little bit, make sure it's not drying out. If it is drying out, you can add a little water to it. This looks fine. Lamb's getting tender. Not done yet, but it's getting tender. Lid goes back on, goes back in the oven. During the time that the lamb is in the oven braising, you need to cook the pasta and also char the tomatoes. Of course, you're supposed to use Orzo with this. We're in Russia, and right now I cannot find Orzo anywhere. I looked for it, it does not exist. So I'm using this little penne pasta. The principle is exactly the same. You're going to boil it till the Orzo's done or the other pasta is done. And then you're going to add it in after the lamb is done braising, as you'll see in a minute. When the pasta's cooked, you add a little olive oil, toss it around, keep it from sticking to itself, and then set it off to the side until the lamb is done braising. To char the tomatoes, just put them down on an oiled metal baking sheet like this, and then put them under the broiler until they're charred. And when they're done, loosen them up from the pan. And when the time is up, take it out of the oven, get rid of the cinnamon stick out of here. And we're going to add in the pasta. And these tomatoes, we'll stir this around. So now we transfer it to a baking dish like this, and you dot it with some feta, crumbled feta. How much you use, you know, it's up to you. How much feta you like is how much feta you use. You don't need a lot though. It's just to add a little tang to it. And then we're going to put parmesan over the top of that and broil it. Okay. Now, the parmesan you do need about 25 grams for this amount. And now this goes under the broiler.
I'm very pleased to announce the release of Volume 3, The Focus on Food Chemistry. I want to clear up a few things about these 3 volumes. First, they all contain completely different information. There's no duplication, they're not revisions. When I wrote Volume 1, I had 2.5 years of YouTube videos to cover. People had been asking me for the printed list of ingredients for all of those dishes, and so I obliged. There are recipes with stepwise directions and many tips offered throughout, as well as an extensive history of Russian cuisine over the last 1,000 years, but Volume 1 is very different from Volume 2 and 3. In volumes 2 and 3, I only had about 9 months of YouTube recipes to cover in each, so I was able to provide stepwise directions for everything. In volume 2, I included a lot of additional information about cooking and some simple examples of flavor chemistry to set the stage for volume 3. While volume 2 hopefully got you thinking about some of the processes that go on in cooking and how flavors are expressed and sensed at the molecular level, the topic was painted with pretty broad strokes to make it easy to digest. Pun intended. Volume 3 is a milestone of the series, in which I have included an entire introductory course in food chemistry, which is why Volume 3 is about 70 pages longer than Volume 2. And if you just want the recipes, that's okay too. You don't have to read the first few chapters, but if you've ever been curious about what influences tastes and flavors and the rationale for deciding cooking times and temperatures and why things taste different when they're combined in different ways, this book will answer many of those questions. It also paves the way for Volume 4, which will be next year. If you want to know more about my adventures as a chef around the world and have some great laughs along the way, be sure to check out the video tour of my book, 40 Years in One Night. It's up on YouTube right now. Click the link. Also look for my cocktail book, Cocktails of the South Pacific and Beyond, Advanced Mixology, available through Amazon online.